Hi, I'm Dr. Lorian Pratt. I'm with Quantellia. This video shows how a decision model can help us to understand the impact of donations to a program like the Carter Center's Community Justice Advisor Program. The Carter Center is an NGO that operates in a number of countries. Here we're focusing on Liberia exclusively, which is a small country in Western Africa. Liberia has faced substantial challenges in the wake of conflicts that ended over the last few years and is working hard to become a democracy. The Carter Center's been helping. In the Community Justice Advisor Program, trained paralegals visit remote rural locations and help the people there with legal disputes. They'll help either plaintiffs or defendants in a variety of ways, either in providing mediation services or also helping them navigate a fairly complex legal system, which has two parts. There's a formal system as well as an informal system. In this video, we show a decision model that illustrates how the CJA program's expansion has a number of follow-on effects within Liberia. And I'll be showing you the simulation of this model running as we go forward. But for now, I just want to emphasize this is a proof of concept. We're showing some new tools that we might have in our toolkit for understanding some of the key dynamics in Liberia, but a number of aspects of this model have not yet been aligned with the real situation there. Instead, use this as inspiration to understand what some of those dynamics might look like. And as we describe in the paper that accompanies this video, please keep in mind that the model here can be extended in a lot of different ways in order to provide us great insight in how we might scale up the CJA's program, which has only been applied in just a few counties at this time. So let's begin. We'll be going into the details of this model later on, but for now I'm going to just run the model and let you see how it plays out. I'll draw your attention to a couple of things. First of all, this is the economic health of Liberia here. Notice how it's going from red to green. And also these other factors, law enforcement, corruption, the crime rate, and legal resources. On a county-by-county basis, those are also turning green as a result of the impact of these CJAs. So let's do that one more time just so that you can see all of the details. Again, if we start over, we see that the economic health of Liberia as a whole is relatively low, as indicated by the red color of many counties. There is corruption, issues with law enforcement, issues with the legal system, as well as with crime. And according to this model, which demonstrates the impact of these CJAs, we can see these red colors turning to green, and then also various things improving, in particular the economy improving as the crime rate goes down, represented by this blue line. Law enforcement improves, and the availability and effectiveness of legal resources also improves, as shown by the red line. And you can see now, near the end of this model, things have steadied out and everything's green. And in the rest of this video, we'll show you some of the impacts of how that happens, as well as the impacts of different decisions around the amount of CJA help that supports various counties across Liberia. So there's a lot of complexity in this model. Let's drill into this and understand it piece by piece. So let's zoom into just part of this model, and what you can see here is that I have what's called a lever that allows me to change the weekly expense, the weekly dollar amount that I spend on CJAs. And what you can see happening here is as I raise and lower this dollar amount, you can see that the allotment of CJAs to different counties is changing. One thing I'll draw to your attention is that the amount of CJAs that are allotted to each county actually is different from one county to the next. So how do we make that decision? So I've added a couple of graphs to this chart that illustrates how this decision is made. The number of CJAs in this model is dependent on the crime rate in each of the counties. This graph shows each county as one of these blue bars, and the current crime rate in that county represented is the height of that bar. And we'll talk about our source data in a little bit. This graph shows the population in each county. And the way we determine the number of CJAs allotted to each county is based on those two factors. So you can see in particular that Montserrado County, which contains Monrovia, has both a high crime rate but also a relatively high population. And so it gets allocated a larger number of CJAs, especially when there's a small dollar amount that's allotted on a weekly basis than other counties. So this model allows us to experiment with the impact of the CJA allotment decision on a number of other factors, which we'll cover now. So let's start not just looking at this part of the graph and not looking at the details of how this model operates, but I'm going to start that simulation again, but this time instead of allotting $50 per week to CJAs, we're actually going to allot 0. And so you can see this motorcycle picture is very small in each county. So take a look at how the red color changes to green when we don't have CJAs in place. And then also take a look at the economy and what happens to it, as well as these other factors that have an impact on the economy. So we're running the simulation, and really there's pretty much no change according to this model. The country still has an overall economic issue, but as we increase the number of CJAs, what you see is the economy starts to improve. The green line crime rate starts to go down. Corruption decreases. And again, as we continue to increase the number of CJAs, we do see an improvement over time. Although, interestingly, there's an interesting dynamic here. Since we didn't start out with a lot of CJAs, there's a substantial expense on law enforcement and also on the legal system. So the economy actually doesn't grow as much because there aren't any dollars left over for other economic growth factors. Pretty much we've gotten ourselves into a situation where the majority of the dollars that are available are being used exclusively for controlling crime. So let's talk about the mechanism. Why is it that, according to this model, CJAs can substantially help in an environment? Well, CJAs help to impact the crime rate, and we'll talk about how that happens in a moment. But the major dynamic here is that as crime decreases, that creates a more stable business environment, and so the economy can improve. An improved economy means that we have some money to spend on law enforcement, on legal resources, and on anti-corruption efforts. Those three investments will feed back in reducing the crime rate, which in turn reduces economic health. So what we have is a feedback loop going on here, where lower crime improves the economy, which improves law enforcement, which in turn lowers the crime rate. And so we kind of go around in a circle here. Similarly, there's a second interacting feedback loop where economic health improves, again, gives us resources to improve the legal system, which reduces corruption, and then that also helps us to improve the economy. So we have two kind of interlocking feedback loops. Think of this as the engine of a car, and the CJA injection is a starter motor that we're using to get this feedback loop going, such that ultimately our goal is that a country like Liberia does not require external aid, but is healthy enough on its own such that its economy can support a thriving law and order community. So let's talk about the mechanism by which that investment in CJAs ultimately leads to a lower crime rate. If you'll recall, that was the main lever that we talked about previously, was this investment in CJAs. So as we make a weekly investment in the CJA program, which changes the number of folks that are working out in the counties, that has an impact on our cumulative investment. And that cumulative investment, you can see, is connected to the weekly expense. So as we spend dollars, we have more and more funds cumulatively available to them. And again, as we've talked about, There's a number of studies that have shown that the more you have these paralegal professionals, there's increased trust in the legal system along a number of dimensions. There's also additional studies that show that the more that folks trust in the legal system, the less likely they are to take the law into their own hands. And so if there are simmering ethnic and land disputes, as there are in Liberia, as well as many other developing countries, we can decrease the likelihood that those simmering disputes actually escalate into criminal behavior if folks have a greater sense that the legal system is there to protect them. And so what's going on here is we spend money on CJAs, they have more money cumulatively, that impacts the overall trust in the legal system, which impacts the likelihood that simmering ethnic and land disputes will lead to crime. Now there are a variety of kinds of crime. Ethnic and land disputes are just one, so there's also a baseline crime rate that is not influenced by the impact that we've seen here. In addition, this trust in the legal system is also impacted by corruption and also the availability and sophistication of legal resources. And we saw how those factors were also part of that previous feedback loop. So here what we're really showing is just kind of the chain of events that connects this weekly expense per CJA up to the crime rate. And then if you recall what we showed earlier is that this crime rate is then kind of that the thing that starts that starter motor that gets these feedback loops going, that as the crime rate lowers, economic health improves, and then that leads to the other factors improving, as we saw earlier. So let's take a look at those same interactions and observe what happens with them while the model is running. So these 5 elements that you see kind of tiny in the middle of this screen are the ones we showed a moment ago, where crime rate has this feedback loop, has an impact on economic health. Economic health impacts law enforcement, and then those kind of support each other. Similarly, as the economy improves, we can reduce corruption, we have more legal resources, and those, of course, impact crime as well. So this is the graph we saw earlier. And then what you're seeing in the corners of this graph, these 4 maps of Liberia, are the county by county levels of law enforcement, corruption, the crime rate, and then legal resources. And again, these are based on some baseline studies that we'll show you in a moment. So in addition to these county by county graphs of these 4 factors, I've also shown a graph that explicitly calls out the trust index, the level of trust in each county, as well as that dispute to crime escalation likelihood. And as we run the simulation, I'd like you to observe a couple of things. One is you're going to see a change in these blue bars, so you're going to see that trust index growing over time as the CJAs have a chance to be effective. Number 2, you're going to see a change in the green bars. You're going to see a lower likelihood of disputes escalating into crime. And number 3, you'll also see the colors of the counties changing, reflecting these various leading indicators to improved economic health. So let's run the simulation, and you can see all of those things happening. So we can see again the graphs we saw earlier, but we see substantial improvement in this court's trust index. At the same time, the likelihood of a dispute escalating to a crime is lowering. That's these green bars. And then over time, you can see all of the counties in Liberia turning green, indicating that we're really in a new part of what you'd call state space, meaning that we've got this feedback loop going. The starter motor is done, and now we're able to really sustain ourselves without outside intervention. And let me show that. So as we're watching this simulation, I'm actually going to take the CJAs out of the equation here. I'm going to lower them, and so we're no longer making an investment in the CJA program. And what you can see is everything stays green, right? The economy is still healthy, the legal system, corruption is still in a good place. Why is that? It's because really what we've done is again, like a starter motor might do, we've started the engine. And now that the economy is healthy, the country can afford to provide these kinds of services on its own, like we might see in a developed country. And we've really shifted into a very new place for Liberia where the economy is strong enough that it can sustain itself on its own. So let's talk just briefly about the source of some of the data that's shown here. This is a paper called Talking Peace in Liberia, published in June 2011 by the Human Rights Center at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. Patrick Bink, Phuong Pham, and Tino Kreutzer were the authors. This is probably, of everything we've read about Liberia, one of the most comprehensive both data as well as qualitative analyses of what's going on. As you can see, there's a lot of information here, again on a county-by-county basis, as to various factors like perceptions of former combatants, their security and crime, etc. This was the source of much of the data that we used in this analysis. And basically what we did is we took the data in that paper, we copied it into a number of worksheets on a spreadsheet, as you can see here, and then through the data binding capabilities of this tool, we basically read directly from that spreadsheet all of these various data sources that in turn feed the county by county information from each one of these sources. Another important data source that we used here is this paper by Sandifer and Siddiqui called The Impact Evaluation of the Carter Center's Community Paralegal Program. These folks talk specifically about how when CJAs are in a region, they create kind of a difference of differences. So what you can see is that any metric that you might measure is improving over time anyway, even without an intervention like the CJAs. But a CJA program can have this kind of difference of differences impact. It changes the rate of improvement of something. And so it was this kind of analysis that we used in a lot of those causative links in this model, showing how CJA investment impacted other factors. So just a little bit more on the kind of data that's used to support a model like this. This is what we call a hybrid qualitative/quantitative model, and it's meant to illustrate some of the key system dynamics in a situation like Liberia, but it is living in the absence of full studies that would give us time-varying impacts of different interventions. So let's talk about what we mean in particular. Each one of these factors here, law enforcement, corruption, economic health, etc., has a different level in different counties. And so the spreadsheet that we showed earlier breaks that down. In particular, the trust in the courts on a per county basis, we created as a function of the knowledge of the court system and also the belief that folks have that Liberian judges are fair and impartial in their decision making. So what this is something that reflects just that county by county breakdown in the trust in the judiciary. But what it doesn't tell us is how an intervention like the CJAs impacts that breakdown. And so remember, we have this lever back here that we can move that says that the simulation shows how that impacts these various factors. And for those, there are not longitudinal time-based studies that were available at the time of creating this model. Instead, we created impact curves on each of these lines that showed how each factor impacted another element based on our experience doing this in other situations. So that's a place where making this more of a quantitative model would require coming up with a deep understanding of how these cause and effect links play out. But really importantly, even in advance of that kind of hard data, we still have to make decisions. We still have to decide how CJA's investments should be done and to measure the impact of those investments. And so it's important to be able to move forward in the absence of comprehensive data but based on our experience in other countries and in other similar situations, such that we can have a fairly rational reasoning structure about how all of these things hook up. In particular, about how the crime rate interacts with the economy, interacts with law enforcement, corruption, and legal resources. So from the point of view, again, of these dependencies, this is a qualitative model, but from the point of view of the county by county discrepancies, we were able to tie this to some base underlying data, as we talked about a moment ago. So thank you again for taking the time to understand what we think is really useful and valuable new technology to add to the factivism approach that we're taking in countries like Liberia, combining the best of data that we might have with our knowledge and expertise and understanding of this very complex system, especially when that data might not be perfect. If you'd like a copy of the companion paper to this video, I've included my email address here, so please just drop me a line and I'd be happy to share that with you.